The headline version of baseball is for everyone. This isn't that. Streak Plot Scout goes below the surface. The 40-man decisions, the prospect ETAs, the draft implications hiding inside yesterday's transactions. Built for the people who understand that the game is won before it's played. Let's get into it. Michael McGreevy is posting a 2.40 ERA in the first 2 months of the season with a 5.85 xERA underneath it, a gap of 3.5 runs over 56 innings. For your program and your draft board conversations, this story is not primarily about McGreevy. It is about what happens when a major league organization faces a regression cliff on a walk-year starter in the middle of a pennant race, and what that means for how they value the development of the next arm in the system. Let me frame the numbers the way a front office is going to frame them before we get to the pipeline implications. The ERA looks like a staff ace. The underlying contact quality looks like a number 4 starter on a bad day. Hard hit rate against McGreevy is sitting above 41%. Barrel rate elevated at 10.7. His fastball is down 1.5 miles from last season, sitting 91.4, and hitters are making quality contact at a rate that the strand luck and sequencing has masked so far. This ERA is not going to stay at 2.40. The metrics are nearly unanimous that it is coming up, and the only question is how fast and how far. Now, McGreevy has historically beaten his xERA. His career average gap is about -1 run, meaning his ERA typically runs about a run below what the underlying contact quality would project. That is a real skill. Some pitchers consistently outperform their peripherals through sequencing, soft contact inducement, or defensive context. But this season's gap is 3.5 runs. Even crediting him a full run for his historical tendency to beat the number, he still has 2.5 runs of regression baked in. That regression is coming in the second half. For St. Louis, this creates a specific organizational tension. They have $129 million in luxury tax space, meaning they can absorb a replacement financially. But McGreevy is in a walk year at $800,000. He is pitching himself toward a new contract right now. Every start he makes before the regression catches up is a start that builds the case for a second deal. Every start after the regression arrives is a start that erodes it. The Cardinals front office is watching a walk-year starter bank value in real time, while the organization quietly knows the foundation is soft. Here is where this story becomes directly relevant to your draft board and your recruiting conversations. The Cardinals are a deep development organization. They have historically been one of the strongest player development systems in baseball. The pitching arm of that system, in particular, has produced major league starters consistently across cycles. When a walk-year starter like McGreevy faces a regression cliff in the second half, the organization's response tells you something important about how they are valuing their pipeline at this moment. Do they go to the trade market for rotation help before the deadline? Do they trust the internal system to absorb the workload if McGreevy's ERA climbs to 5 by July? Do they extend McGreevy before the regression hits to lock in a below-market deal? Each of those decisions signals something different about the organizational pipeline assessment. If St. Louis goes to the trade market for a starter, the signal is that the upper levels of their pitching system do not have a ready answer. That is useful intelligence for you when you're talking to Cardinal scouts about what they need in the 2026 draft. They are looking at arms with fast-developing timelines, college juniors who can move through AA and AAA in 18 to 24 months and be ready by 2027. If they trust the internal system, that is a different signal, one that says the pipeline has depth and they believe in what they have. That is the organization you want to be placing your arms into, because they believe development works and they are willing to give pitchers time and repetitions to find themselves. For your program specifically, the McGreevy arc is instructive in a way that goes beyond scouting and organizational analysis. It is a living case study in what happens when surface results and underlying skill diverge, and why the development work you do in your pitching lab, the contact quality management, the sequencing, the approach evolution, matters more than the ERA column. McGreevy at 240 this spring looks like a success story. McGreevy at 520 in August, after the regression has arrived, will look like a cautionary tale. The pitcher is the same, the stuff is the same, the ERA is not a reflection of skill, it is a reflection of a moment in time, and moments in time do not hold. When you are recruiting a high-ceiling arm in your 2026 or 2027 class, the conversation around ERA can be seductive. High school pitchers who dominated their prep competition with a 0.90 ERA and never surrendered a hard hit are not necessarily ready for what college hitters will do to them. The evaluation question is not what the ERA says. The evaluation question is what the contact quality says. How hard are hitters hitting the ball against him? How often are they barreling him up? What does his chase rate look like against hitters who can recognize breaking balls? Those are the questions McGreevy's arc is forcing in St. Louis right now, and they are the questions that should be driving your in-season pitching evaluation at the college level. Hard hit rate is your early warning system, barrel rate is your leading indicator, ERA is your lagging indicator. When you see a gap like McGreevy's in your own pitching staff, a guy who looks lights out in the ERA column but is getting hit hard and getting saved by sequencing and defensive range, you have a developmental problem to solve before it becomes a performance problem. The velocity story is also worth examining for your recruiting lens. McGreevy is sitting at 91.4 this season, down from approximately 93 last season. That 1.5 mile per hour drop is not catastrophic on its own, but paired with an elevated hard hit rate and a barrel rate above 10%, it tells you the arsenal is losing its margin for error. He was probably working in an acceptable band when the fastball was 93. Hitters were respecting the velocity enough to be late on mistakes. At 91, the margin for command error shrinks considerably, and the secondary pitches have to carry more weight. When you are projecting a prep arm for the 2027 draft, the velocity question is never just about today's reading. It is about the trajectory and the floor. A prep arm sitting 90 to 92 who is physically projectable, long levers, clean arm action, room to add functional strength, is a different proposition than a prep arm sitting 90 to 92 who is already physically maxed. McGreevy's velocity loss, in the context of his already thin command margin, is the kind of development red flag that your staff needs to be identifying in the evaluation process before a player signs, not after. The walk-year contract piece adds a layer that is worth addressing for your players who are approaching draft eligibility. McGreevy signed for $800,000 AAV. He is in a walk year. The standard narrative says a strong first half in a walk year earns a payday. But the market for second contracts is not blind to underlying metrics, not anymore. Every front office with a competent analytics department is going to look at McGreevy's 5.85 xERA and 41% hard hit rate and discount the 2.40 ERA accordingly. The contract he earns this offseason will reflect a negotiation between what the ERA says and what the underlying data says, and in today's market, the data wins. Your players need to understand this because it changes how they should be thinking about their own development windows and draft positioning. The player who arrives at the big league level with stuff and a track record of limiting hard contact, not just striking guys out, is the player who earns the second contract on favorable terms. The player who runs good ERA over weak competition and cannot sustain the contact quality metrics does not earn that deal. Development at the college level, your level, is where that foundation gets built or does not get built. The 30-day watch item for the Cardinals and for your scouting calendar. If McGreevy's ERA climbs above 450 by mid-June, watch whether St. Louis activates their trade market interest or begins aggressively promoting their upper-level pitching inventory. Either signal tells you something about how they are valuing the pipeline heading into the second half and how aggressively they will be scouting college arms in the back half of this season ahead of the 2027 draft. One specific program implication to close on: the Cardinals' pitching development infrastructure. Their ability to take a contact quality challenge starter and rebuild his approach around better sequencing and shape, rather than pure velocity, is one of the reasons their pipeline has historically been reliable. If you have an arm in your current program who is getting hit too hard for his stuff grade, who needs an organization willing to invest in approach development rather than just velo chase, St. Louis is historically one of the best fits in baseball. That conversation starts with your area scout. Use this arc as the entry point. Here's the pipeline angle on this one, and it's not obvious at first, so stay with me, because Lance McCullers Jr. finishing out a $17 million contract while posting a 6.86 ERA at the back end of an 11-year career is not just a Houston story. It's a market signal story. And market signals have direct implications for how organizational pitching demand gets shaped heading into the 2026 and 2027 draft cycles. McCullers is in the final year of his deal. The ERA is ugly, nearly 7, and while the underlying metrics suggest some of that is strand luck and sequencing rather than pure skill degradation, the trajectory here is not encouraging. The career HR per 9 has been climbing for years. The stuff has not reversed. He's on pace for significantly fewer innings than his career average, and the contact quality against him is real. Hard hit rate north of 50%, barrel rate elevated. This is a pitcher in the late stage of a long career who has given his organization significant value and is now likely in the final chapter of that relationship. What does that mean for Houston's draft priorities? And what does it mean for you as a coach building a program that feeds into organizations like the Astros? Start here. Houston is a contending organization, barely, at 18% playoff odds, but contending, with almost no luxury tax space, $3.3 million. When your payroll flexibility is that constrained and your rotation is anchored by a pitcher with McCullers' age and injury profile, your draft and development function becomes even more critical than it already is. You cannot spend your way out of rotation problems when you're at the tax threshold. You develop your way out of them. That means the Astros need to be right on pitching in the draft, and they need to be right soon. McCullers debuted in 2015. He is an 11-year veteran. The organizational muscle memory of developing a frontline starter from the draft through the system and into a big league rotation is roughly a 6 to 8 year process for a high-ceiling arm. Houston's front office knows this timeline intimately. When they look at the back of their rotation and see a 32-year-old walk-year starter with an ERA approaching 7 and a HR per 9 that has been climbing for 3 consecutive years, they are not solving that problem with a free agent signing. They are solving it in the draft room. For your program, this is a direct scouting priority signal. The Astros have historically valued pitching with premium spin rates, high chase generation, and the ability to limit hard contact. McCullers himself was a curveball-dominant pitcher who manufactured weak contact. As his velocity and spin have declined, which is the natural aging curve, the results have deteriorated because he was never a pure velocity over the plate pitcher. He needed the curve to work to make the fastball dangerous. When the secondary flattens, the whole arsenal flattens. That tells you something specific about what Houston scouts will be prioritizing in the 2026 and 2027 draft cycles. They are not going to reach for a soft-tossing command artist hoping the secondary plays up. They need arms with present stuff, velocity that works in the zone, breaking balls that generate real chase, and enough durability projection to get through the development pipeline without a significant health interruption. The McCullers experience, repeated over a decade of elite but fragile starting pitching, has taught Houston's front office that durability is not a secondary consideration. It is a first-round evaluation factor. If you're recruiting a junior or senior arm in your 2026 draft class who checks those boxes, mid-90s fastball plus breaking ball, clean mechanics, the Houston organization is one you should be calling. They need to restock. They need arms that can develop on a 3 to 4 year college to big league timeline, which means the 2026 draft is a critical replenishment year for them. Now let's talk about the career arc piece, because this is where the coaching and recruiting conversation gets genuinely valuable. McCullers' HR per 9 has been climbing for years. The career average is 0.92. He's sitting at 1.61 this season, and that number was elevated last year too. When you see a pitcher whose primary skill degradation shows up as elevated hard contact and home run rate, rather than walk rate or strikeout rate, that is a specific diagnostic. The stuff is losing enough in the zone that hitters are making better decisions against him and squaring up pitches he used to get away with. The implication for how you're teaching your college pitchers is direct. You can mask command volatility for a long time with premium stuff. McCullers did it for a decade. But the moment the stuff recedes, even slightly, the command volatility becomes exposure rather than eccentricity. A pitcher who walks 3 and strikes out 10 per 9 at 96 is a different story than the same pitcher at 92. The arsenal discount when velocity drops is not linear. It is exponential. When you are evaluating your own pitching prospects for the draft conversation, the question you need to be asking is not just what grade is the fastball today. The question is, what does this pitcher look like if the fastball is 2 miles per hour lighter? Does the profile still work? Does the breaking ball still play? Does the command hold? McCullers at his best was elite because the curveball gave him a second weapon that was genuinely independent of the fastball grade. As the fastball declined, the curveball became easier to read, and the profile unraveled. The pitchers who age well, who sign the second big contract after the walk year, are almost universally the ones who developed a third pitch or a genuine change early enough in their career that the arsenal had depth when the stuff started to regress. That developmental arc is something you can influence at the college level. The starter who arrives in your program throwing 2 pitches and leaves throwing 3, with command of all 3, is more valuable to a major league organization than the 2-pitch striker who needed a big league pitching coach to find his change. That's your program's selling point in a market where organizations like Houston are reassessing their rotation construction after a decade of betting on high stuff, lower command profiles. You are the last stop before the draft. What you develop in your pitchers over 2 or 3 years of college ball is what organizations are buying. One more practical note on the market implications of this arc. McCullers is in a walk year with an ERA near 7. His leverage for a new contract, with Houston or anyone else, is essentially 0 unless the second half of this season looks dramatically different. The organizations that were considering McCullers as a rotation piece going into 2027 free agency are now pivoting. That rotation need does not disappear. It gets redirected toward the trade market, toward internal development, and toward the draft. Every team that had McCullers on a potential free agent shopping list going into this offseason is now a team looking to solve a rotation problem through other means. That is more organizational demand for quality pitching in the draft room this summer and next. More demand means more scouting attention on your program. Use it. Let's start where this matters for your recruiting pitch, because a Tommy John surgery to a big league ace in May changes the organizational calculus for pitching in ways that ripple all the way down to your 2027 class visits. Corbin Burns is done for the season, Tommy John. The Arizona Diamondbacks are on the clock in the NL West with a rotation hole that doesn't have a clean internal fix, and the most important name you need to know coming out of this is Daniel Egan. But before we get to Egan, let's talk about what this injury means structurally for the org, because that context shapes everything that follows for the pipeline. Arizona was sitting right around a coin flip on the playoff odds when this happened. You lose a top-of-rotation arm in late May, you're asking your remaining starters to carry more load, your bullpen to eat innings they weren't built to eat, and your front office to accelerate decisions they were planning to make in July or August. That pressure doesn't stay in the big league building. It travels down every level of the system. Now, Daniel Egan. He's currently a AA, FV 45, 8th in the org, and his ETA was projected at 2027. That projection just got stress tested. The Diamondbacks are a contending organization. They don't have the luxury of being patient with a rotation that now has an open slot, and Egan is the most advanced arm in the system with a major league caliber fastball profile. Here's what the scouting report tells us. 93 to 95 downhill fastball, graded 50 on the current tool with 80 projection ceiling. Command sitting at 45, which is the honest developmental concern. That gap, present velo, future ceiling, current command, is the exact profile that gets accelerated in a contending org under duress. Arizona doesn't need Egan to be finished. They need him to be ready enough. So what does this mean for your program and your 2027 class conversations? First, this is a live demonstration of the accelerated pathway, and you should be using it in every recruiting conversation with a high-ceiling prep arm in your pipeline right now. This is not theoretical. A 22-year-old who is projected for 2027 is now being looked at for a potential 2026 call-up, potentially this summer, because a big league rotation opened up in May. That's the argument you make when a kid tells you he's not sure about the developmental timeline. You point to Egan. You point to what just happened in Arizona. The pipeline works fast when organizations need it to. Second, the command grade on Egan, 45 present, is instructive for how you're evaluating your own pitching prospects in the 2027 class. Contending organizations will accept command risk if the velocity profile is present and the delivery is repeatable. What they will not accept is soft stuff with command questions. The separation in value between a 93-95 arm with command at 45 and a 90-91 arm with command at 55 is significant at the organizational level. When you're doing your spring evaluations of prep arms in this cycle, the velocity floor matters more than it did 3 years ago. Organizations running short on rotation depth are drafting velo and developing command, not the other way around. Third, think about the specific draft implication for Arizona in the 2026 and 2027 cycles. A club that just lost its ace to Tommy John is going to be pitching heavy in its draft priorities for the next 2 years. They need to replenish. They need arms that can develop through the system on a 24 to 30-month timeline and arrive ready. That means college arms in the 2026 draft, juniors who can move quickly, and premium prep arms in 2027 who have the ceiling to headline a rebuild of rotation depth. If you're coaching in a program that produces 2 or 3 legitimate pitching prospects per cycle, and you haven't had a relationship with the Arizona front office in recent years, now is the time to build one. They are in acquisition mode. They are going to need arms at every level, and they are going to be scouting college programs with the specific lens of developmental timeline. How fast does this organization get a guy from draft eligible to big league ready? Your answer to that question, backed by your recent draft history, is your recruiting pitch and your organizational selling point at the same time. The Egan acceleration is also a useful conversation piece when you're talking to parents of prep pitchers who want to understand service time and development windows. A kid who signs at 18 and hits AA by 21 is exactly the profile that gets pulled forward when something like this happens. The door doesn't open on a schedule. It opens when the organization needs it to open. Now, the honest counterpoint, and you need to have this conversation with your own staff before you use Egan as a recruiting example, the 45 present command grade is a real developmental question. Being accelerated to the big leagues before you've solved your command reliably is not always a gift. Sometimes it's exposure. If Egan struggles in AAA or at the big league level because the command hasn't caught up to the opportunity, that storyline becomes a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration. The pitcher who develops at the right pace and arrives ready on his own timeline has a better career outcome than the pitcher who gets rushed into a role and gets hurt or loses confidence. That nuance, the difference between acceleration being an opportunity and acceleration being an overextension, is one of the most valuable things you can communicate to a high-ceiling prep arm in your program. The goal isn't to get to the big leagues as fast as possible. The goal is to arrive ready. Egan may be ready. We'll find out. But the conversation is worth having. What to watch over the next 30 days? Whether Arizona uses a bulk innings approach with their existing bullpen arms to bridge the gap, or whether they fast-track Egan to AAA with an explicit June or July call-up timeline. If he goes to AAA within the next 2 weeks, the call-up window is this summer. That is the signal. For your 2027 class, the draft implication is straightforward. Pitching needy contenders are going to come into next spring's evaluation cycle with specific needs and specific timelines. If you're sitting on a 94 plus prep arm with projection and a clean delivery, the market for that player in the 2027 draft is going to be strong. Start those conversations now. That's the read on the day. Same game, deeper read. Back tomorrow. This is Street Plot Scout. Greatness is never random.